What is up YouTube, Noezone here, and today I'm going to be reviewing the newest movie in the DCEU, or possibly the DCU, Blue Beetle. This movie was directed by Angel Manuel Soto, and it stars Xolo Maridueña in the lead role of Jaime Reyes, who you might know as Miguel Diaz in Cobra Kai. And in this movie we follow Jaime Reyes as he suddenly finds himself in possession of an ancient relic of alien biotechnology called the Scarab. Then when the Scarab chooses Jaime to be its symbiotic host, he's bestowed with an incredible suit of armor that's capable of extraordinary and unpredictable powers, forever changing his destiny as he becomes the superhero Blue Beetle. But that's basically the synopsis of the film before I get into what I think of it. But first I want to go over what I wanted going into this movie. And honestly, the first thing that I wanted out of this movie was just a fun origin story. I feel like comic book movies have strayed way too far from that in recent memory. Like, it feels like everything is trying to set up the greater universe at hand, instead of just focusing on the characters like phase 1 of the MCU did. And I will say that this movie feels like it could place in like a phase 1 of a DCU, which makes me really optimistic that this is the first DCU movie, because James Gunn did say that Blue Beetle is the first DCU character. So I don't know if this movie or the events of this movie are going to be canon, but that leads me into my second thing that I wanted going into the film, and that's that I want this to be canon to the DCU. And I feel like it really should have been marketed as such, or it should have just released after Aquaman, because I truly do not understand why we're getting this movie and then Aquaman, which is a movie I think should be canned in general. Because if you're going to say in Michael Rosenbaum's podcast that this is the first DCU character, why shun away from this movie being a part of it? So I really don't know what James Gunn's doing with that. I really would have just swapped the release dates of this, and plus I feel like this movie would have done way better at Christmas time, because this movie honestly just got dealt the worst hand possible. Because I'm going to go ahead and let y'all know before I get into my positives, mix, and negatives on this movie that I really enjoyed it, and that this movie deserves so much better. But now to get started on my positives of Blue Beetle. And first I want to kind of talk about the story. The story for this movie just feels kind of generic, and like I kind of touched on earlier, this movie is very much a traditional origin story, but I feel like that's really necessary for a character like Blue Beetle, who's kind of obscure to even some comic fans. So I really didn't have a problem with it being kind of a basic origin story. It actually stays as a positive because it feels more like that Iron Man 1, Spider-Man Homecoming, and it shares some elements with movies like Ant-Man and Shazam. And I feel like we're at a point with comic book movies where we're gonna get a lot of projects that just feel kind of the same, and it has been like that for a while. My friend PJ actually brought this up after my second watch of the movie, and it just really got me thinking that like these origin story films for DC in the future, because they're just now getting started while the MCU is way into phase 5 now, are they going to start to feel really similar to the MCU, or are they going to kind of change the game a little bit? Because this movie, while it is a good story, it's a very generic story. But this movie does bring elements to its story that are different from other origin story movies. And the biggest one is definitely how they handle the Reyes family, because I don't think there's a single like comic book movie or blockbuster that has handled the family element better than this movie has for me. And Fast and Furious try to bring that to the mainstream, but the family element hasn't felt the same since like Fast and Furious 6 in my opinion. And Shazam did the family element pretty well, but it was more of like found family with the whole foster home thing. And to talk about each Reyes family member for a little bit, I just want to say that George Lopez absolutely kills it as Rudy, and he's definitely the funniest character in the movie, and that's to no one's surprise. There were just so many moments where he had me and my friends and the entire theater just dying laughing. Jaime's sister does really well as this kind of like smart ass character, and I really like the way their brother-sister relationship is handled, because it just feels like so real. There are a lot of movies where like siblings don't really even feel like siblings, and they actually feel like they like kind of just mess with each other all the time, and that's something that I can really appreciate in a movie since I do have a lot of siblings. You have Nana Reyes, who gets some of the best moments in the movie, and I can't even go into detail about them because you just have to experience them for yourself for the first time. You have Jaime's mom, who doesn't really get much to do, but she has some pretty good moments as well. And you have Jaime's dad, who is kind of the heart of this movie in a lot of ways. And I really like what they did with his relationship with Jaime, how he's trying to teach him how to find his purpose, which is mad relatable to someone like myself who's 20 years old and still trying to find his place in the world. But now to get to Jaime Reyes himself. And I saved him for last on purpose because I do really love what Xolo Maridueña brought to the role, and I really do think that this character is going to get really popular in the future just because of how relatable he is, and that he's the first Hispanic Latino lead in a superhero film. But I will say one thing about the whole family element of the movie that kind of bothered me just a little bit, and it's that Jaime Reyes is very underdeveloped in comparison to his family at times, and I felt like they could have got a little deeper with his character, but honestly that's more of a nitpick than anything because everyone was done really well. And I want to talk about a few more characters that are pretty integral to the story. You have Jenny Cord, and let me just say that she's the plot of this movie. But in all seriousness, I really enjoyed her character in the movie. I really liked a lot of the emotion and drive that she brought to being Ted Kord's daughter. And overall, the performances for all the characters that I just mentioned were pretty stellar, especially Xolo Maridueña. There are just some scenes where he gets so into it when he's like mad or emotional that like, dude, like I felt his pain. And he keeps proving to me why I think he's one of the best actors on Cobra Kai, and that he's a bright future ahead of him. But next I want to talk about the direction of the film, and there's some cinematography during some of the action scenes that is absolutely incredible. There are a lot of fade in, fade out shots that kind of reminded me of Spider-Man 1 in a lot of ways. There's actually a lot that reminds me of Spider-Man 1 in this movie now that I think about it, but again, that's kind of from it being kind of an origin story, but there are some stylistic choices that reminded me of Sam Raimi in a couple of ways. And the CGI actually looked really good in this movie. And to put that in perspective for you, this movie was going to get thrown up on Max, and The Flash was always going to be a theater release. Let that sink in. There are some spots where you can kind of tell it's like, oh, okay, I can kind of tell this was going to be a TV movie. But overall, to the person that did not know that, they're just going to think that this was pretty good CGI. And I think most of that is due to the fact that most of this movie is practical, because the director actually came out and said that they wanted to prioritize using practical effects, which is another W for this movie in my opinion. I also enjoyed the sound design of this movie. There were a lot of sound effects from the suit that sounded really cool, and the score for this movie, oh my god, the score. The score for this movie goes so hard during these fight scenes, dude. Like, it gets me so hyped. It kind of has this, like, synthwave feel to it, and I heard another reviewer compare it to, like, Stranger Things, and I thought that was a pretty accurate, like, comparison, because, like, the synths in the score just, like, it sounds so, like, neon and, like, futuristic, while also having kind of, like, also a retro feel to it, and I just think that that was a nice touch, especially with the color scheme of this movie being kind of Vice City looking. So if they ever do a Blue Beetle 2, I hope they bring the same composer back, because this man cooked. I thought this movie was paced pretty well, but that's mostly because it was only 2 hours and 7 minutes long. But I'm not trying to undercut it with that, because there are still some superhero movies that are 2 hours long that are absolute snooze fests. But overall, I do think this movie did well with the pacing, and there weren't really any moments that made me absolutely tune out or just like get bored. So the pacing gets a thumbs up for me. I want to kind of talk about the emotions that this movie gave me. And with this movie, you're going to get your basic like run-of-the-mill origin story emotions, even though I feel like this one does hit a little harder in some ways without spoiling anything. But I kind of want to talk about a thing that I touched upon earlier, and that's the finding your purpose story element. And I think that they did that storyline so well. And like I said earlier, it was just a very relatable story element for me. And there were some times in the movie where there were some speeches talking about this, and I like got a little teary-eyed, I'm not gonna lie. But I will say, in terms of full-on crying, this movie only got me once, but I can't say what that is, obviously, because this is a spoiler-free review. But next I want to talk about how much this movie entertained me. And this movie was pretty entertaining, I'm not gonna lie. The action, like I kind of mentioned earlier, was really well done. Like, you could definitely tell that they played the Injustice games before they made this movie, because oh my god, some of the combos that Blue Beetle pulls out are just mind-blowing. And you could also tell that they were taking advantage of Xolo's experience on Cobra Kai. There's even a moment in the movie where Xolo hits his Cobra Kai fight stance, and it made me so happy as a fan of that show. But overall, this movie did have me thoroughly entertained. That's why it's in the positive section. And one more thing that I'd like to talk about before we get to the mixed section of the video, and I just wanted to applaud this movie for how well it handled being in between the DCEU and the DCU, and not having like any direct cameos to characters in either universe, because there are some mentions of Superman and Batman, but there are no references to like the actual versions of Superman and Batman, which makes me very optimistic that this is a part of the DCU, but we'll just have to see what James Gunn says in the future. But now to move on to the mixed section of my review, and man, while Carapax looked really cool, and they did a really comic accurate suit with him, he was just a very run-of-the-mill villain for Blue Beetle to punch. They did end up adding some elements to his character that add a little bit more depth, but it didn't truly save him for me. Overall, I don't think there was much they could have done to add more depth than that to his character with also saving it, but at the end of the day, he was just alright. That's why he's in the mixed. But now to move on to my negatives of the movie. And don't worry, this section is not very long at all. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Victoria Cord, and man, she is just this most generic bad guy ever. And I said that about Carapax, but like, they added some stuff to him that made him a little bit more like redeemable and be like, yeah, you know, he's a decent character. But with Victoria Cord, you just hate her. Like, there's nothing else to her character, and it's not like a good, like, oh, I hate this character, like, she's a really good villain, and she's doing all these things. No, it's just, she's just unlikable. And I know you're not supposed to like the villain, but I mean in the sense from, like, an audience of being like, man, that was a cool villain. She wasn't even that cool. She didn't really do anything in the movie that I felt like was really cool even. Because it's like a duo villain thing with her and Carapax. She's like the big business person, and then Carapax is like the brawn. So it kind of leaves her in this state where she basically just does a whole lot of monologuing. And the weird thing is, I really like the actress that they picked for her, but you could just tell that she did not want to be in this movie. But overall, she's really my only negative of the movie. But now to get to my final thoughts on Blue Beetle. And I just want to say that while I know this movie isn't perfect, I absolutely loved it. It's truly like DC's Spider-Man Homecoming / Iron Man 1 with elements of Ant-Man and Shazam, like I said earlier. Xolo Maridueña does great as Jaime Reyes, and I would be super disappointed if he doesn't get to play this character in the future. The Reyes family as a whole whole was absolutely amazing, and they are truly the heart of this movie. The action scenes were really well done, and they were very reminiscent of the Injustice games, which made me super happy. It's a pretty funny movie without it really overdoing the jokes, which is a big problem that I've had with a lot of comic book movies in recent memory. This movie also hits hard emotionally at all the right times, but this movie kind of falls short on the villain side, with Carapax and Victoria Cord being very generic. But if we're being honest here, MCU Phase 1 also had that problem, so let's not be too harsh on this movie for that. And I just want to end off these final thoughts by just saying, please go support this movie. It truly deserves it. But now moving on to my overall score of Blue Beetle. And I gave the story a 3.5 out of 5, the acting a 4 out of 5, the characters a 5 out of 5, the direction a 4 out of 5, the visuals a 4 out of 5, the sound a 4.5 out of 5, the pacing a 4 out of 5, the emotion a 4 out of 5, the entertainment a 5 out of 5, a casual score of 4 out of 5, and all of this rounds up to about 43 out of 50 points. But I think I'm actually going to round down on this one and give my final score a 4 out of 5 stars. But that's going to be it for my review of Blue Beetle. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like on it. It really helps out the algorithm. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for way more content like this. Make sure you share the video with a friend if you think they would enjoy it as well. Leave a comment with your thoughts on Blue Beetle. But as always, guys, it's been Noezone. Peace.